when Yashasvi Jaiswal scored his debut ton. You all felt that perhaps the West Indies is the easiest place to make their debuts, right? Before Yashasvi Jaiswal, you had Prithvi Shaw scoring a century on debut. You then had Rohit Sharma score a century on debut against the West Indies. So it felt like, okay, an Indian player comes on against the West Indies, he just scores centuries for fun, especially on debut. But remember, scoring a century on debut is a very, very rare feat indeed when it comes to Test cricket. Not many have done it. Yashasvi Jaiswal has joined a very elite list of nations or players who has hit a century on debut, and that too overseas. He is the first Indian opener to actually hit a debut century as an opener. And at the same time, if you look at it, Rohit Sharma, Prithvi Shaw, they all achieved it in India. So the question is, after Yashasvi Jaiswal's debut century, is the West Indies the easiest team where you can make your debut against? In this statistical analysis, what I am about to do, you will be shocked to know that West Indies is actually not that easy. It is actually the third easiest. Which are the other two nations where you can make your debut and score runs at will? You will be shocked by the names here. And you will be shocked by which nation is the most difficult where you have to make your debut against. Because I will come straight to the chase. Which is the country where debutants have scored the maximum number of centuries? England. Yes. England is the easiest place where you can score a century on debut. Just ask Sourav Ganguly. Just ask a lot of Australian players who have made their centuries in England. 26 players in the history of cricket, ever since they made their debuts. This is the opponents I am speaking, not England players. This is opponents of England. 26 players have scored tons. 5 players have done it in England. And the recent example, if you have to look at India, for example, it is Sourav Ganguly, 1996. He scored a century on debut at Lord's. There have been 7 150 plus scores on debut in England by a batter. So, if you have to look at this particular angle, England with its swing and seam conditions, overcast conditions, green pitches, it is actually the easiest place for you to make your debut, because there have been 26 instances where debutants have scored a century in England. Which is the next easiest on the list? Yes, it is the West Indies. Because the West Indies, if you look at it, there have been 17 players who have scored tons on debut. It's ranged from Rocho, Dominica, it has ranged to Jamaica, Port of Spain, and all these places where they have scored the bulk of their centuries. 6 players have scored in the Windies, and if they go abroad, if you look at it, Windies players, Prithvi Shaw, Rohit Sharma, they all scored centuries in India. Everywhere else you look at it, there have been 17 players who have scored debut tons against the West Indies. 6 have come in the West Indies. Out of that 6, 4 150 plus scores, if you look at debutants, that's happened in the West Indies. So yes, you may argue for the fact that West Indies, it does become a bit easier in this current era where you can score centuries. But the easiest, if you have to look at it, and where you get maximum success as an opener or maybe as a debutant, it's England. 26 instances. West Indies, 17 players. The next on the list is Australia. 16 instances of players having tons. 16. And this is slightly less than the West Indies, 17. 5 players in Australia, they have scored tons in Australia. 5 150 plus scores also in Australia. So on debut, whichever opponent has played in Australia, 16 of them have done it. 5 have scored it in Australia. When Australia have gone abroad, whenever they have been on debut, they have scored. So 11 players overseas, when Australia has gone, they have scored hundreds. The last, if you may look at it, Adrian Bharat, he scored a century at the Gabba on debut. He made his debut at the Gabba, he scored a century there. 5 150 plus scores. That is how, once you settle in Australia, you can get the maximum benefit of it. So debutants, England, West Indies and Australia, they are the easiest to score a century there because of the conditions. England, surprisingly, But if you have to look at it, once you settle down and then you score in England, runs are in the offing. We all were wondering, right? Okay, get a debutant in against India, he will flourish. But if you have to look at it, 15 players have tons on debut in India. This is in India, by the way. 8 players in India, 15 players overall. Whenever India have gone and that player has made his debut, he scored 100. But if you have to look at it, only one 150 plus score. So India gifts centuries on a platter like that. But when you have to look at 150 plus, it's happened only once. Can you guess which was the player on debut who made his century on debut in India? 150 plus? You guessed it. 2004, Michael Clarke. Michael Clarke hit 151 at Bangalore in 2004, and that was his debut test match in India. So, debut test match, whenever India they have played 15 times, they have 15 players have tons, 8 have happened in India, only one 150 plus in India. So, that is the way how you look at it. New Zealand. New Zealand with its swing and seam also, they have had a better control in that sense. So, 12 players have tons, 8 players in New Zealand, 3 150 plus scores. Which was the last player who scored a century on debut in New Zealand? You have to go a long time back. I mean, if I have to look at Australia, the likes of Faf du Plessis scored 100 on debut in Adelaide. Adrian Bharat, as I mentioned, he scored 100. So, that's why very, very interesting. 12 players have tons, 8 players have scored it in New Zealand. 3 150 plus scores in New Zealand. So, if you have to look at it, Matthew Sinclair's 214 on debut, but it was against the West Indies. South Africa. 9 players have scored tons on debut in South Africa. 6 players in South Africa. Johannesburg is the most among them, followed by Centurion and Durban. But no 150 plus scores ever. That is how batting in South Africa is actually a little bit more tougher in these situations. Sri Lanka. This is really, really staggering. 8 players have tons, 6 players in Sri Lanka and only one 150 plus score. Who hit that 150 plus score? Fawad Alam for Pakistan, 2009. He remains the only debutant to have hit a 150 plus score in Sri Lanka. So the myth is maybe the subcontinent has flat decks. Batsmen can flourish, but on debut it can be slightly intimidating. Pakistan. 6 players have tons, only one player has ever achieved it in Pakistan. That is the situation. Who was that player? It was in 1975, West Indies. The rest of them have all scored when Pakistan has stood overseas. That is the way Pakistan, it's a very, very weird combination. But yes, the bowling attack of Pakistan means that it is very difficult to make your debut there. Bangladesh. Only 6 players have tons, debutants. 2 have happened in Bangladesh. It happened in 2000 as well. And then once against India recently in the 2022-2023 World Test Championship cycle. It happened there as well. 3 150 plus scores in Bangladesh. So even in Bangladesh, it is very, very dodgy. Now for the shocker. Which is the most difficult team to make your debut against? Zimbabwe. We all criticize Zimbabwe and all those kind of things that put down Zimbabwe cricket. But if you make your debut against them, you are very unlikely to score a century there, because no player has ever scored a debut century in Zimbabwe or against Zimbabwe. 150 plus scores. Opposition I'm talking about. Dave Houghton hit a century on debut against India in Harare in 1992. This is the opponents that I'm talking about. No opponent has ever hit a century when he has debuted against Zimbabwe. So, West Indies is the second easiest, but the easiest is England, and shockingly, the most difficult is Zimbabwe. So, all those chants about Zimbabwe and all those things which put down a particular nation, you may have to take that back, because at the end of the day, you have to ensure that you get going and you score a century wherever you make a debut. So, that is the situation. Kudos to Yashasvi Jaiswal for making it in the West Indies. Not many people make it there. So, thank you so much folks for joining us for this live. We'll be back with more updates on sports today. Tap that bell icon so you know when we go live, and don't forget we are on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as well. Thank you.